I thought I knew my wife completely, believing we were soulmates, destined to spend our lives together. But as life unfolded, my illusion of a perfect marriage was shattered, revealing a painful truth. My wife was cheating on me. Yet unbeknownst to her, I had a secret weapon, a plan that would change everything. She thought I was a pushover, a worthless man who wouldn't act. But she was wrong. Her expression when she discovered my next move would have been priceless. But by then, I would be long gone. The next step was clear. I needed to move on, leaving everything behind. My SUV sat in the airport's long-term parking, and I figured I had about 2 weeks before anyone even realized it had been abandoned. With just a briefcase and a travel bag, I made my way to the Delta terminal. Inside that briefcase, my entire new life. Identification documents, several $1,000s in cash, and all the necessary travel papers. To the outside world, I seemed like just another traveler heading to his destination, but there was something more to me. My face may have been on the ID, but the name on it was not my own. Every document, passport, driver's license, was forged, yet flawless. I was ready to disappear. As I entered the terminal, I went through the TSA checkpoint with ease. They scanned my belongings, finding nothing suspicious, no weapons, no water bottles, no red flags. I passed through security, just another traveler in the crowd, and headed to the men's room. There, in a stall, I changed my appearance, shedding the tailored suit of a businessman for the casual look of a tourist. A brightly patterned shirt, shorts, and sandals. The perfect disguise to blend in with passengers who just returned from a vacation in Las Vegas. By the time I walked out, no one would suspect I was the same person who entered. I followed the crowd to the baggage claim where I spotted a suitcase left unclaimed. In one swift move, I grabbed it, blending seamlessly into the throngs of travelers. I hopped on the terminal tram, and within minutes, I was in another part of the airport. Another men's room stop, another change of clothes. The contents of the suitcase I had just stolen were discarded, and my transformation continued. At the ticket counter, I checked in the suitcase and presented one of my new IDs. I now had a fresh boarding pass in hand. But instead of heading through security again, I weaved through the shopping area, eventually making my way toward the exits. From there, I returned to the tram, this time heading to Continental's terminal, where my real journey would begin. Soon, I would be boarding an international flight. By the time my wife noticed my absence, I'd be living under a new name in a new country. She wouldn't find me, or my money. Now, let me explain how I ended up here, starting a new life. My story begins in Western New York, where I was born in 1960. I was an average student in high school, not remarkable in academics, sports, or anything, really. My parents were working class, my father did construction, and my mother took care of the home. After high school, I attended a local college, living at home while balancing a part-time job at a fast food joint during the school year and helping my dad with construction during the summers. I maintained a modest 2.6 GPA. Nothing stellar, but enough to get by. After 4 years, I earned my business degree, but when I entered the job market, I quickly realized that my mediocre academic record from a non-prestigious school didn't impress employers. I wasn't the standout candidate they were looking for, and as a result, I spent more time job hunting than actually working. Eventually, I landed a position with a small property management company. It wasn't glamorous, no fancy office or personal assistant. Instead, I had a desk, a phone, and a long list of responsibilities, all for a meager starting salary. I soon realized that in a small business, everyone wears multiple hats. My duties included everything from collecting overdue rent and assisting with evictions to interviewing new tenants and even helping the maintenance crew clean and paint units. It wasn't what I had envisioned for myself, but I learned valuable lessons about the real estate industry. Over time, I developed a passion for real estate, something that surprised even me. The owner of the company, my boss, took notice of my growing interest and decided to mentor me. His children had no interest in the family business, so he began treating me like the son he never had, grooming me to take over one day. One afternoon, he called me into his office. "Billy, take a look at these bank foreclosures and tell me what you think," he said, handing me a stack of paperwork. "I've never done this before," I admitted. Don't worry, I'll review your suggestions before making any decisions, he replied. But I need your thoughts after lunch. I looked at the clock. It was almost 10 a.m., and lunch was at noon. With only a couple of hours to spare, I had to skip my meal to dive into the task at hand. After a few hours of intense research, I identified a few promising properties and presented my findings to him at precisely 1 p.m. That moment marked a turning point in my career, but it was also the beginning of a journey that would lead me to where I am now, fleeing from a life I thought was mine, leaving behind a wife who betrayed me, and stepping into a new identity, one that no one could trace. For nearly an hour, I sat quietly, listening intently to my boss's feedback. Finally, he broke the silence, his bluntness catching me off guard. "So far, everything you've picked has been subpar," he remarked sharply. Then, with a hint of frustration, he motioned me over. "Come here," he said, "and I'll show you how it's really done." Over the next week, we carefully assessed various properties, combing through every detail. By the end of the process, we had narrowed down a handful of options with real promise. It was an intense week of learning, eye-opening, really. I began to realize that my seemingly harsh boss was, in fact, a real estate genius. His expertise was unmistakable. He participated in the bidding process for 4 properties. Out of those, we secured only one, a 4-family apartment building constructed in the early 1910s. It was situated just outside a wealthy neighborhood where young married couples and college students had started to settle. While the building required significant renovation, we purchased it at a remarkably low price. The bank agreed to finance the entire renovation process and even postponed mortgage payments for 6 months, which meant we had minimal upfront costs and ample time to complete the necessary work. At the closing, my boss handed me the keys and said something that completely floored me. "It's your project now. Start tomorrow." For the next 6 months, I experienced every emotion imaginable, highs, lows, and everything in between. I felt exhilaration one moment, despair the next. But in the midst of it all, I learned more about the rental business than I ever thought possible. By the time the first mortgage payment was due, all the apartments were rented out, and the property was running smoothly. Just as I thought the surprises were over, my boss approached me again. "Bill, sign these papers," he said. "What for?" I asked, puzzled. "For the property," he said with a knowing smile. "Why?" I inquired, feeling even more confused. "Because I'm transferring ownership to you. It's your building now," he explained casually. I was stunned. "What? Are you serious?" I asked, barely able to believe what I was hearing. "Bill, I'm getting older," he said, his tone softening. "I want to pass my knowledge on to someone. I hope you'll let me pass it on to you. My kids? They'll likely sell everything when I'm gone. But you can build something of your own. Consider this my small gift to you." And with that, my real estate journey truly began. I founded Bilco Properties LLC and ventured into the real estate business on my own. About 5 years later, my boss and mentor passed away, just as he had predicted. True to his word, his children sold off his entire portfolio, seeking top market value for every property. By that time, I had acquired 15 properties of my own, all located in prime areas and fully rented out. My financial strategy was simple. I relied on rental income, aiming to cover all expenses as long as at least half of a property was leased. Fortunately, most of my buildings maintained full occupancy. While I wasn't wealthy by any stretch, I wasn't struggling either. Things were going well. Then, an unexpected opportunity arose. The person who had bought my former boss's real estate business went bankrupt. His approach, hiring too many staff and spending more time on the golf course than on his business, had backfired. I seized the chance to acquire several commercial properties at a fraction of their value. It was around this time, at age 30, that I met the woman who would eventually become my wife. Wendy, along with a friend, had purchased a piece of commercial real estate in a decent neighborhood. They rented one of the office spaces for their decorating business. When I first met them, I was dressed like any other worker, blending in with the crew. In contrast, they were dressed impeccably, as if they had just stepped out of a fashion magazine. Perhaps it was their profession as interior designers that made them feel the need to leave an impression, and they certainly did, especially Wendy. She was the more assertive of the two, and she quickly captured my attention, and my heart. In my mind, I began to imagine a future with her. I saw her standing in front of a quaint cottage covered in vines, with two young children eagerly waiting for their father to come home from work. In that picture, I saw myself as that father. When I presented the rental price for their office space, I could tell by their expressions that they were concerned it was too expensive. Sensing an opportunity to help them, and perhaps spend more time around Wendy, I said, "The building has a few vacancies, so I can offer you a discounted rate for the first year." In reality, there was only one vacancy left. Their faces lit up and they eagerly accepted my offer. They signed a 1-year lease with an option to renew. Wendy then asked if they could have the owner's contact information to express their gratitude. I smiled and gave them a fake name, using my mother's maiden name and a P.O. box. "The owner prefers not to be contacted directly," I explained. "A simple thank you note will do." Over the next year, I discreetly helped them with various issues, all while maintaining the guise of just another worker. I watched their business grow steadily. By the time the lease renewal came around, they agreed to a modest rent increase, still lower than what the other tenants were paying. One day, Wendy confided in me that her business partner was getting married and moving to the West Coast. "I don't think I can manage the business on my own," she said. "Can we break the lease?" My heart sank at the thought of her leaving, so I quickly responded, "I can lower the rent back to the first-year rate. My boss doesn't like having vacant spaces." In truth, I didn't want to see her go. Her face brightened with a huge smile, and she kissed me on the cheek. That kiss sealed the deal, both for the lease and for what would eventually become the love of my life. I didn't expect to fall in love so quickly, but there was something about the way Wendy looked at me that day, her eyes, her smile. It was different. It was the kind of smile that stayed with you long after the moment passed, and I knew right then that something special had begun between us. A year later, I found myself standing at the altar, exchanging vows with her, promising a life together. In that moment, I was hopeful, excited for the future. Our first year of marriage flew by, and soon after we were blessed with a daughter. Wendy had a difficult pregnancy, and her struggle during childbirth led to a hard decision. Her doctor advised against future pregnancies, and so she decided to have a tubal ligation. We both agreed it was the right choice, but things changed between us after that. Although our physical relationship remained intact, I noticed that her interest in intimacy slowly faded. While I still had the same desire for closeness, Wendy seemed to drift in a different direction. Her attention turned toward her business, and over time I became less of a priority. It wasn't that she didn't care, but she began to see herself as the sole provider, the one holding everything together. I tried to explain to her that I was also contributing, that I owned multiple properties and was building something significant in real estate. But every time I brought it up, she shut me down with the same response, "I don't want to hear about your work. It's boring." It was like a wall was put up between us, and I couldn't break through it. Despite her dismissive attitude, I loved my family deeply, so I accepted her low opinion of me. She was still beautiful, and I began to feel like I was just average. To keep our family together, I tolerated her criticisms. I found solace in the growing bond with our daughter, Amy, who became the center of my world. When I wasn't wrapped up in a real estate deal, I spent every spare moment with her. Watching her grow gave me the strength to push through life's challenges. As the years went on, Wendy and I grew further apart. Her work brought her into contact with wealthier, more influential clients, and that seemed to pull her away from me. I continued to quietly build my real estate portfolio, never flaunting my success in front of her. By this time, I had accumulated a considerable amount of wealth, but Wendy remained unaware of the extent of my achievements. To her, I was still the man she considered a lesser part of the household. Eventually, Wendy asked me to sleep in the spare bedroom, citing my snoring and restless sleep. The invitations to share her bed became less frequent until they stopped altogether. I accepted this situation without protest, all for the sake of our daughter. I knew that if I pushed Wendy too hard, a divorce was inevitable, and the prevailing wisdom was that mothers usually retained custody of the children. I couldn't bear the thought of being cut out of Amy's life. So, I poured all of my energy into my business. My real estate ventures grew, almost like a secret mission. I operated under the radar, using a network of corporations, P.O. boxes, and office fronts. Even my own employees didn't fully understand the scope of what I was doing. By the time Amy turned 15, I owned over $25 million in mortgage-free properties and another $50 million in properties with some mortgage debt. My holdings had evolved from simple multi-family units into larger apartment complexes, office buildings, and even a shopping mall. Amy and I had developed an unbreakable bond. I was the parent she could always count on, at her soccer games, when she was sick, on shopping trips. I filled the gaps left by Wendy, who was increasingly absent, engrossed in her business. Ironically, Wendy still saw herself as the main provider, even as I quietly built our future. I never corrected her misconception, fearful that revealing my financial success might lead her to file for divorce. To her, I was still the man who needed her achievements to have any standing in our household. As Wendy's career thrived, she surrounded herself with people from the art and design world, flamboyant, larger-than-life characters. I tried to support her, but it was clear that she found amusement in making me uncomfortable. She would assign me the most eccentric assistants whenever I visited her office, knowing I felt out of place. It felt like a power play, another way for her to assert her dominance in our relationship. Still, I endured it all for the sake of keeping my family intact. Over time, I became more and more submissive, allowing Wendy to take the reins while I focused on my real estate empire. She was unaware of the millions I had accumulated, believing she was the true breadwinner. Even as our marriage grew colder, I held on, not for love of Wendy, but for love of my daughter. Wendy viewed me as an average man with no ambition, someone who could never rise to her level of success. But what she didn't know was that, beneath the surface, I had built an empire, a vast network of properties and investments. Yet I remained silent, hiding my wealth, because revealing it might shatter the fragile balance that kept our family together. Wendy's disdain hurt, but my love for Amy gave me the strength to endure. I wasn't going to let anything take me away from her, not even a loveless marriage. I played my part in silence while slowly amassing the resources that would one day, I hoped, provide Amy with the security and opportunities she deserved. As Wendy continued her ascent in the business world, I quietly cemented my place as a real estate mogul, unnoticed and unappreciated by the woman who once captivated my heart with a smile. During our second year in business, it became clear that Millie and I had vastly different approaches to running things. I was assertive, often using my charm to win over clients, particularly male ones, and catering to the interests of female clients who were open to more than just professional relationships. Millie, on the other hand, had a strong moral compass. While I found excitement in pushing boundaries, Millie was more conservative. Our differing values ultimately led us to part ways before our second year even concluded. She moved to the West Coast with her boyfriend, tired of my behavior. Millie left me the business and all its assets without asking for a thing in return. Once she left, I was anxious about how I'd manage the office's upscale rent without her contribution. But, using my persuasive nature, I managed to get Bill, our landlord, to give me a discount for another year. To express my gratitude, I kissed him. A playful gesture at first, but to my surprise, I enjoyed it more than I expected. Perhaps it was because I hadn't had any meaningful romantic encounters in over a month with either men or women. Despite Bill's rather plain demeanor, he proved to be a surprisingly attentive lover, always making sure I was satisfied before tending to his own needs. It was a refreshing change from the selfishness I had experienced in previous relationships with men, and a contrast to the business-like interactions I had with women. However, outside of the bedroom, Bill was incredibly dull. He had little to no interest in anything beyond real estate and accounting, which made social gatherings awkward. Most of my friends found him boring, and engaging him in conversation was often frustrating. I tried introducing him to cultural outings, operas, concerts, contemporary plays, but it was a struggle to keep him awake. His lack of refinement became a liability for me, especially given my involvement in the high-end decorating business. I often had to attend charity events to build my reputation, and Bill, when he did accompany me, contributed very little. He wasn't exactly a standout at these gatherings, his attire and demeanor often making things more difficult rather than helping. One evening, I received an invitation to an important charity event and decided not to tell Bill until it was too late for him to rearrange his plans. "Bill, I'm going to the event tonight. It's essential for my business. You understand that, right?" I said firmly. "Won't it look bad if you go alone?" he asked. "I'll bring one of my decorators. He's flamboyant enough to keep people from assuming we're romantically involved," I reassured him. At that event, I met James. He was elegant, handsome, and exuded an air of wealth and sophistication. As I stood at the bar, having just been abandoned by my decorator who had run off with another guest, James approached me. "Pardon me, but it seems your companion has left you. May I offer my company for the evening?" he said, introducing himself as James William Hawthorne. His charm was undeniable, and I agreed to spend the evening with him. As we talked, I was captivated by his wit and presence. He was everything Bill wasn't, engaging, cultured, and mysterious. On the taxi ride home, I couldn't stop thinking about him, and I realized I was aroused in a way I hadn't been in a long time. It wasn't Bill who sparked these feelings this time. It was James. A week later, James called, inviting me to lunch and asking for my opinion on redecorating his office. That was the beginning of our affair. Within a month, we were meeting regularly in hotels, sneaking away 2 or 3 afternoons a week. James was thrilling in a way Bill never could be, though I couldn't say he was more fulfilling. While Bill treated me like a queen, prioritizing my pleasure, James treated me more like an object, but I found that exhilarating. He introduced me to experiences I had never imagined, pushing boundaries I hadn't considered crossing before. There were days when I felt sore from our encounters, but I craved the intensity. I was drawn to the way James dominated me, embracing my submissive side completely. The idea of refusing him anything seemed impossible. Bill's tender affection began to pale in comparison to the raw passion I felt with James. I felt owned by him, completely devoted to fulfilling his desires. James even started inviting other men to join us. While the idea would have horrified me before, I found myself agreeing, intoxicated by the power dynamics he had created. I never wanted it to end. Eventually, I decided that I needed my own space, somewhere James and I could be together without the limitations of my life with Bill. "Bill," I said one evening, "I've decided to rent an apartment in the city. The commute from this farm to my office is too long and it's cutting into my work time. I know you love this place and I'm not asking you to leave. You and Amy can stay here, but I need to be closer to my business." He began to protest, but I cut him off. "There's no room for discussion. I've already made my decision. I've even narrowed it down to 2 places. And with that, the next chapter of my life with James began. By the end of the month, Wendy had officially moved out, and I couldn't ignore the pain in Bill's eyes as he tried to mask his feelings. "Don't worry, honey. I'll still come home on weekends for you and Amy," she said, as if that would ease the sting of her departure. She had carefully selected a luxurious apartment close to her office, with James's help, of course. To make Bill feel involved, she showed him the apartment, asking for his opinion. But before he could even respond, she added with a smile, "I knew you'd love it too. It'll be the perfect place for me to showcase my decorating skills." As they left the building, Bill noticed the building manager recognize him, which wasn't unusual. Bill frequently attended real estate events, so it made sense. But that day, something clicked for him. Wendy had claimed that she got the apartment to avoid the long daily commute to their country house. But Bill realized this was the moment their marriage was truly over. He had long suspected her of having an affair, but now it was undeniable. What Wendy didn't know was that Bill owned the very building where she had rented the apartment. One of his higher-end properties, to be exact. When the building manager spotted Bill, he clearly wanted to talk, but Bill, playing the role of a mere acquaintance, brushed it off, not letting on that he was Wendy's landlord. Later, the manager confirmed Bill's worst fears. Wendy had selected the apartment with her lover, and they had signed the lease together. It had become their secret hideaway. This news shattered Bill's heart, but amidst the pain, his mind shifted to strategy. He knew he had to gather proof of Wendy's infidelity and questionable character if he wanted to secure custody of their children. With the help of his building manager, Bill devised a plan. Together, they installed video and audio surveillance throughout the apartment before Wendy moved in. The excuse was simple. They told tenants that a new building security system was being put in place. Wendy had no idea. Bill ensured that she paid the full rent herself, even making sure it was slightly higher than usual. Since her lover was covering the difference, Wendy didn't seem to mind. Bill took careful steps to protect himself legally, ensuring the apartment was leased under his name, so there would be no issues using the evidence in court. He watched as Wendy essentially moved out of their home, her promises to visit on weekends becoming increasingly rare. His visits to her bedroom became non-existent, and soon the emotional distance between them grew into an unbridgeable chasm. Their daughter Amy, caught in the middle, was overjoyed when Wendy finally visited home for a weekend. Amy missed her mother, especially during a time when a girl needs maternal guidance. She had started to idealize Wendy's lifestyle, fascinated by her independence and seemingly glamorous life in the city. Bill hoped it was just a phase, but he didn't realize how deep it went. When Wendy finally returned to their bed one night, Bill was overcome with thoughts of her and her lover. He could see them together in his mind, hear the sounds of their encounters echoing in his ears. Wendy, always eager to please her new partner, allowed him to belittle Bill in ways that left him feeling utterly inadequate. "Bill, what's wrong with you?" Wendy asked, confused by his inability to respond. "I'm sorry, Wendy. I just have a lot on my mind," he stammered, promising he'd do better next time. But there was no next time. While Wendy's lover sent the rent payments through a collection P.O. box, Bill, ever the strategist, copied each one before depositing them. He had no intention of letting them slip through his fingers unnoticed. But as he gathered the evidence for divorce proceedings, he couldn't resist a bit of retaliation. Bill had connections, and his business dealings brought him in touch with people who could help. With the help of a friend who managed Wendy's lover's bank, Bill began keeping a close watch on his finances. It didn't take long to notice a pattern. Wendy's lover was living on the edge financially. He frequently found himself short on cash, relying on the float time between deposits and withdrawals. Bill saw an opportunity. By timing the deposit of the rent checks just right, he could cause them to bounce, adding financial stress to the already fragile situation. Before long, Wendy's lover started receiving penalties for bounced checks and overdue rent payments. As his financial struggles deepened, he began incurring bank fees, which led to an even bigger problem. His wife's checks were also bouncing, including those she used for personal expenses. Awkward moments arose when Wendy's credit cards were declined in front of her friends, leaving her embarrassed and frustrated. As the penalties piled up, his credit score took a hit. Credit card companies started to tighten their restrictions, lowering his credit limit until it barely covered his outstanding balances. Wendy's frustration grew as her access to their joint credit accounts became limited, and no woman enjoys the humiliation of a declined card. Bill took quiet satisfaction in watching it all unfold. The damage was done, not just to their relationship, but to Wendy and her lover's financial stability. And while he may have been heartbroken over the end of his marriage, he found solace in knowing that Wendy's affair had come with consequences far greater than she had ever imagined. "I thought I had my life figured out. I believed I had met my soulmate in my wife, someone I was destined to spend the rest of my life with. We had a love that felt timeless, effortless, a love built on trust. Or so I thought. But life has a cruel way of revealing the truth when you least expect it. My perfect marriage? It was nothing but a carefully constructed illusion. The harsh truth came crashing down on me when I discovered my wife was cheating. But I wasn't as clueless or as weak as she assumed. She saw me as a pushover, a man who wouldn't dare confront her betrayal. She had no idea what I had up my sleeve. While she believed she was in control, I had already set a plan in motion that would change everything. The look on her face when she realized I was gone, along with everything we had,
would be priceless. But by then, I would be far, far away.
It was time to leave my old life behind. I drove to the airport, leaving my SUV in long-term parking. I figured I had about 2 weeks before anyone even noticed it sitting there. All I had with me was a briefcase and a small travel bag. In that briefcase, my new life. Inside were identification documents, thousands of dollars in cash, and all the travel papers I needed to vanish without a trace. To anyone looking, I appeared to be just another traveler heading somewhere, but my journey was far from ordinary. The name on my documents wasn't mine, though the face on them was. My escape plan had been meticulously crafted, and now I was ready to disappear. As I walked through the terminal, I passed through security like any other passenger. The TSA agents glanced at my belongings, finding nothing suspicious. No bombs, no liquids over 3 ounces, nothing to make them pause. They scanned my briefcase, wallet, and keys without a second thought. I was just another traveler in the busy airport. I headed straight to the restroom. Inside a stall, I changed from my sharp business suit into something far less conspicuous, a bright floral shirt, cargo shorts, and a pair of sandals. I emerged looking like a tourist returning from Las Vegas, blending in perfectly with the crowd. My transformation had begun. At baggage claim, I spotted an unattended suitcase making its rounds on the conveyor belt. No one seemed to care about it, so I casually grabbed it and blended back into the sea of travelers. I hopped on the airport tram, taking it to another terminal, a quick stop in another restroom, and I changed yet again, tossing the contents of the stolen suitcase in the trash. With each layer of clothing I shed, I became someone else. At the ticket counter, I checked in the suitcase and handed over one of my new IDs. The agent handed me a fresh boarding pass in return. But instead of going through security again, I slowly made my way through the airport's shopping area, heading toward the exits. Eventually, I found myself back on the tram, this time bound for Continental's terminal. My real journey was about to begin. Soon, I'd be boarding an international flight, leaving behind my wife, my past, and every trace of the man I used to be. By the time she realized I was gone, it would be too late. She'd never find me, or the money. But how did I get here? How did I become a man so desperate to disappear that I would leave everything behind? My story begins in Western New York, where I was born in 1960. Growing up, I was the definition of average. My grades weren't spectacular, and I didn't stand out in sports or extracurriculars. My parents were hard-working, blue-collar people. My father worked in construction, and my mother took care of the house. We weren't rich, but we got by. After high school, I went to a local college, staying at home to save money. During the school year, I worked part-time at a fast food restaurant, and in the summers, I helped my dad on construction jobs. My college GPA hovered around 2.6, not impressive, but enough to get by. When I finally graduated with a business degree, I thought I'd enter the workforce and land a decent job, but I quickly realized the world doesn't work that way. My mediocre academic record from a no-name college didn't exactly wow employers. I wasn't the standout they were looking for, and I found myself bouncing from one job interview to the next, facing rejection after rejection. Eventually, I landed a job at a small property management company. It wasn't what I had hoped for. No corner office, no fancy title. I had a desk, a phone, and a long list of responsibilities that came with a pitiful paycheck. At first, I was disappointed. This wasn't the life I envisioned, but as I settled into the job, I learned the ropes. In a small business, you wear many hats. I was responsible for collecting overdue rent, interviewing prospective tenants, assisting with evictions, and even helping with maintenance. I quickly realized that this small-time job was giving me a crash course in real estate, and to my surprise, I loved it. The more I learned, the more passionate I became. The owner of the company noticed my enthusiasm and began mentoring me. His kids weren't interested in taking over the family business, so he started grooming me for the role. One day, he called me into his office with a new task. "Billy, take a look at these bank foreclosures. I want to know what you think," he said, handing me a stack of files. "I've never done this before," I admitted. "That's okay. I'll review your suggestions before we make any decisions. I just need your thoughts after lunch." I glanced at the clock. It was almost 10 a.m., and lunch was at noon. With just 2 hours, I knew I had to skip lunch to dive into the project. For the next few hours, I studied the listings, identifying a few properties that seemed like smart investments. At precisely 1 p.m., I walked into his office with my recommendations. That moment was a turning point in my career, but little did I know, it would also set the stage for my escape. My life, my marriage, everything I thought was real, none of it mattered anymore. Now I'm embarking on a new journey, leaving behind a wife who never truly cared and a life I no longer wanted. I was at my wit's end when I sent that desperate message, pleading with him to get her out of that apartment before something terrible happened to her. Legally, I knew there wasn't much I could do now that she had turned 18, but how could I just stand by and watch? Amy may have been an adult, but to me, she was still my little girl. Even though my feelings for Wendy had faded over time, I couldn't turn a blind eye to what was happening to our daughter. The next day, my lawyer, Alan, got back to me. He assured me that he'd look into ways we could help Amy, but warned me that because she was legally an adult, her choices were beyond our control. Later that same day, Alan called again with news that shook me to my core. My daughter, Amy, was pregnant. He told me her pregnancy was likely the result of a relationship with Wendy's new lover, the same man who had dragged her into a dangerous lifestyle. But that wasn't all. Amy and this man had been working at a hotel bar when their client turned out to be an undercover cop. The lover was arrested on multiple charges, including facilitating criminal activities with minors and involvement with illegal substances. I had hoped the arrest would lead to his conviction, but just in case, I forwarded damning evidence, recordings from Wendy's apartment, to both the police and local news outlets. I wanted to ensure that the media would amplify the story, leaving no room for him to hide. I figured that with all the public attention, Loverboy would have a hard time finding any sort of employment in this town again. The added pressure also bolstered Wendy's position in her divorce settlement from the man, who was now in jail, unable to post bail. Amy, however, found herself behind bars as well. Unable to afford her bail, she sat in jail, awaiting her fate. Alan and I discussed her situation at length. His advice was to leave her in custody for now. He explained that it was better for Amy to stay there, where she could get treatment and be monitored, rather than risk her spiraling back into addiction if I paid for her release. In the meantime, Wendy's life began to unravel. Her business, once thriving, had been neglected while she was undergoing treatment. With my help, 2 of her employees broke away and started their own decorating business, taking most of her clients with them. It wasn't long before Wendy's business crumbled, and she found herself evicted from her office suite. Ironically, it was I who had a hand in that, as the building's landlord. She had no income and no health insurance. She even reached out to me asking if she could be included in my policy, but as I had planned for such situations, my insurance didn't cover pre-existing conditions. Fast forward a bit, and I was on a plane headed to South America. I had carefully planned my escape, ensuring there would be no trace left behind. I had plans to land in Cancun, assume a new identity, and then catch another flight to Europe, where a second identity change would allow me to disappear completely. No one, neither my wife nor local law enforcement, would be able to track me down, not with the layers of secrecy I had built around myself. Before departing for Australia, I contacted Alan to check in on Amy's situation. To my surprise, Alan informed me that Amy had been trying to reach out, seeking reconciliation. Apparently, she had discovered just how much wealth I had accumulated. Alan explained to her that I had disappeared, and that unless I wanted to be found, no one could track me down. I instructed him to use some of my funds to prepare a defense for Amy, but to keep her in jail a little longer. She was making real progress in her addiction recovery program, and I feared that if she was released too soon, she'd end up back on the streets, relapsing into old habits. Crystal meth, as I had learned through my research, was particularly hard to quit. Most people struggled with multiple relapses before they could fully recover, and I wasn't willing to take that chance with Amy. 6 months passed, and I contacted Alan again, this time to check on my divorce proceedings. But I was hit with unexpected news. There wouldn't be any divorce. Wendy had passed away from cancer before the papers could be finalized. Since we were still technically married, I was now responsible for her medical expenses. She died alone, in a charity ward, without any visitors. Despite everything, the betrayal, the lies, the pain she had caused me over the years, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of guilt. Once upon a time, she had been the love of my life, and now she was gone, leaving behind nothing but a sad, hollow legacy. Wendy's ashes remained unclaimed at the county coroner's office, Alan informed me. If no one came forward, she'd be buried in an unmarked grave alongside other unclaimed individuals. Alan paused, clearly expecting me to step up and take responsibility for her remains. But I wasn't interested. She had inflicted too much pain on me and Amy for me to forgive her now. I feigned some interest, though, and asked him about Amy. She miscarried in this 4th month, Alan said. It was an ectopic pregnancy. She's still serving a 12-month sentence for prostitution and drug possession, but she's enrolled in a solid recovery program and is making real strides. And what about Loverboy? I inquired, my voice tinged with a mixture of anger and satisfaction. A father's struggle, Amy's journey, and my silent vigil. Even though I already knew what had happened to him, my friends had taken care of it for me, I played the role of the uninformed. He died in a prison yard brawl. His kind never lasted long behind bars. Those criminals weren't treated kindly by other inmates. When I heard the news, I pretended to be surprised. Later that day, I made arrangements in case my daughter, Amy, ever reached out for help. If she comes to you asking about her mother's estate, I told my lawyer, Alan, make sure she has the funds she needs. But only if she's clean, no drugs. If she's clean and sober, support her until she finishes her education and can stand on her own. But if she's still on that destructive path, give her just enough to overdose. Afterward, bury them both in unmarked graves. I knew those words were harsh, maybe even cruel. But to me, it was kinder than watching her slowly destroy herself, living on the streets as an addict. If Amy overdosed, at least her suffering would be brief. I couldn't bear the thought of her falling victim to the horrors out there, some pimp or predator dragging her down even further. If she couldn't escape the addiction, I'd rather she have a quick, painless end than a drawn-out tragedy. Yet deep down, I held on to a sliver of hope. If she somehow found a way to recover, to stay clean, I knew I'd provide her with the fresh start she deserved. I had millions, after all. What was a little money if it meant my daughter could live a better life? Several years passed before I made my way back to town. I stopped to visit Alan, my old attorney. We hadn't spoken in years. He was getting ready to retire, closing down his practice. I wanted to wish him well and thank him for all he'd done. In truth, he was more than just my lawyer. He was my only real friend. I was an old man by then, mostly forgotten by the world, but Alan still cared. Driving through town in my new Bentley, memories flooded back, some good, some not. I passed by the properties I once owned, places where I had made my fortune in real estate. The neighborhoods had flourished, and my former investments looked better than ever. I couldn't help but feel a tinge of regret. When Wendy and I divorced, I had been forced to sell many of those buildings to keep my wealth hidden from her. I often wondered if I'd earned more of Wendy's respect had she known just how much I was worth. But that ship had sailed long ago. When I arrived at Alan's office, I parked and made my way inside. The building was one of the few properties I still owned outright. I had kept it because it housed Alan's law practice. I always wanted to make sure he had a safe place to work, someone to protect his interests. Now that he was retiring, I had decided to gift him the building. It was my way of showing gratitude, ensuring he had something for his old age. "Well, you old bastard," Alan greeted me with a wide grin as I stepped inside. "It takes one to know one," I shot back, smirking as we hugged like old friends. We spent the next few hours catching up, laughing about the years gone by and reminiscing about the past. Then, Alan brought up a subject I had been avoiding, my daughter, Amy. "I'm sure you're going to tell me anyway," I said, feigning indifference. He smiled and shared the news. Amy had turned her life around after being released from prison. She had completed a drug rehabilitation program and was now working as a counselor, helping others overcome their addictions. Despite my initial sarcasm, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Alan continued, telling me about Amy's accomplishments, her enrollment in a social work program at the local college, and her upcoming graduation. He mentioned that I had unknowingly funded her education. Alan had creatively interpreted my instructions, using my money to help her get back on her feet. Then, Alan told me about Amy's new family. She had married a man named Frank Murphy, and they had a daughter together, my granddaughter, Vivian, who was almost 7 months old. Alan described Vivian as a sweet, charming baby, destined to grow into a real beauty, just like her grandmother. His words stirred something deep inside me. I hadn't seen Amy in years, but now I was imagining her as a mother, strong, capable, and sober. The thought hit me harder than I expected. "You've also been covering their living expenses," Alan added, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I arranged for a nanny, Chloe, to live across the hall from them, pretending to be just a helpful neighbor. She's been there to babysit whenever Amy needed to focus on her studies or when Frank had to work late." I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride, even though I had no part in it. Alan had ensured that my daughter had everything she needed to succeed, even when I couldn't bring myself to be involved. Under pressure from Alan, I reluctantly agreed to stay in town for Amy's graduation. He had arranged for us to attend not only the ceremony, but also some of the pre- and post-graduation events. At one of these gatherings, I saw Amy and her husband for the first time in years. She was stunning, her beauty unmistakably inherited from Wendy. I had always known my daughter was beautiful, but seeing her again brought a flood of emotions I wasn't prepared for. I pulled Alan aside from the crowd and whispered, "I don't want to insert myself into Amy's life. It's too hard. Please don't expect me to rush up and greet them." "I promise," Alan replied, understanding the weight of my words. The next day, we took our seats at the graduation ceremony. As each student walked across the stage, the audience erupted into applause. When it was Amy's turn, her husband stood proudly, holding their baby, tears in his eyes. The applause for Amy seemed to echo louder than for the others, filling me with an unexpected sense of pride. Watching my daughter approach the stage, I realized something. Despite the years of distance and the mistakes both of us had made, Amy had become everything I had once hoped for her. And in that moment, I was proud. At the center of the stage, the dean paused dramatically and with evident pleasure announced, "It is my great honor to present this special award to you, Amy Murphy. You have been chosen for this distinction by both your peers and the faculty. Your selfless acts of encouragement have touched countless lives, leading to a graduation rate for this class that surpasses any in the school's history. Alongside your diploma, you will receive a certificate of appreciation signed by every member of your class and the faculty. Amy, you are deeply loved and will be sorely missed." As Amy made her way across the stage, she was met with a standing ovation. My heart swelled with pride. In that moment, I realized I felt more for her than I did on the day she was born. My daughter had blossomed into an extraordinary individual, and I couldn't be happier for her. After the ceremony concluded, I made my way back to my car, but the aisles were crowded with students and visitors, making it difficult to navigate. As I moved through the throngs of people, I tried to keep a low profile to avoid being recognized. Suddenly, I spotted Amy, her husband, and my granddaughter walking up the aisle nearby. "Damn!" I muttered under my breath, wishing for a hole to swallow me up. I felt trapped while my daughter and her husband remained oblivious to my presence. But then, my granddaughter caught sight of me. I watched her closely as she clung tightly to her father's neck, her big eyes scanning the crowd. At nearly 9 months old, she seemed remarkably independent. In her adorable, childlike voice, she began chanting Bopa, a common term for grandfathers, her excitement evident as she squirmed to get down. Amy reached over to take the baby from her husband's arms, following her gaze to where the little one pointed. Unbeknownst to me, Chloe had been showing my granddaughter my picture and explaining who I was. To my delight, it appeared the child had learned well. Amy remained composed as she greeted me with a simple, "Hi, Dad," expressing her gratitude for my support over the years. Apparently, Alan had shared my involvement in their lives about a month ago. Later, I discovered that he had been quietly protecting this small family for years. explaining to Amy that it was my financial support that had sustained her education and other expenses. Alan had played the role of the father I couldn't be while still acknowledging my contributions. I looked at Amy and smiled warmly. I wouldn't have missed your graduation for anything in the world. Covering your expenses was the least I could do. After all, I was the one who left you on your own. Her husband, Alan, glanced at me, his uncertainty palpable as he tried to navigate this unexpected encounter. Sensing his unease, I reached out to steady him. Meanwhile, my granddaughter tugged at my shirt, her eyes sparkling. "BPA!" she exclaimed, pointing at me. Amy then spoke up. "Vivian wants you to hold her, Dad. Would you like to carry your granddaughter?" Before I could respond, I found myself lifting the delighted little girl into my arms. She clung to me tightly, proudly declaring to anyone within earshot that I was her BPA. In that moment, I was captivated. This precious child had already stolen my heart. Suddenly, I felt like a grandfather, a father, and a father-in-law, relishing every precious moment. It seemed as though my years of solitude were finally coming to an end, and my heart began to mend. Eventually, we made our way to one of the expansive parking lots with Alan, my attorney. "Let's head to a restaurant in your car and catch up with your family. There's a lot to discuss after all these years," he suggested. As we approached a sleek Bentley, Alan's expression shifted to astonishment. "Is that a Bentley?" he exclaimed, staring at the $300,000 vehicle in disbelief. I passed him the keys, grinning. "Interested in driving, son?" The radiance of his smile outshone the parking lot lights. He was eager to take the wheel. We headed over to his worn-out old Ford to grab the car seat and other essentials for traveling with a young child. As I surveyed the aging vehicle, an idea struck me. Tomorrow, I would give him his own set of keys to the Bentley. I could always procure another car for myself later. Once we were on the road, I found myself seated in the back, with my granddaughter nestled between Amy and me. Little Vivian clung to my arm, chatting away like any young child. A lump formed in my throat. "Dad, we need to have a serious conversation," Amy said, her voice steady yet laced with emotion. "I owe you a lot of apologies. I was foolish and self-centered. I never realized how much it hurt you when I left to be with Mom." "There's no need to apologize. I'm proud of how you've turned your life around and built a wonderful family. I understand now that you needed your mother back then, and she needed you too. I just wish you both hadn't been taken advantage of by that James guy," I interjected. "Dad," she continued, her tears welling in her eyes, "I'd like to be a part of your new journey if you'll accept me. I've made my share of mistakes in our relationship, and I'm eager to make amends. We have so much to talk about. I pray I never have to face that James again." Her tears were not of sorrow, but rather a newfound sense of belonging. His lies destroyed my mother, and his depravity nearly destroyed me. If it weren't for Frank finding me, I might still be in jail, or worse. It took 4 attempts to conquer my addiction, but Frank was my saving grace. His love helped me through it. Now, little Vivian is my motivation to stay clean. There's so much I want to teach her as her mother. Amy wept for much of the journey, but it was a cathartic release, a sign of healing. Throughout dinner the next day at their apartment, and in the days that followed at my hotel, we spoke openly, reconciling years of pain and solitude. Eventually, we recognized that many of our issues stemmed from my late wife and her treatment of me. In that moment of reconnection, it felt like the beginning of a new chapter, a chance to rebuild our relationship and create a family bond that I had long yearned for. We all came to a painful understanding that Wendy was self-centered, always prioritizing her own desires above everything else. Though she had an outward beauty that captivated many, there was a profound emptiness beneath the surface. Despite the heartache, I couldn't deny that a part of me still longed for her. I knew that no one could truly replace her in my heart. As time went on, Amy began to see the truth. She recognized that I wasn't the villain her mother had painted me to be, but rather a man of depth and strength that Wendy had never acknowledged. One evening, during a heartfelt conversation, Amy looked at me with a mix of curiosity and concern. "Do you still love her, Dad?" The question pierced through me, and I felt the sting of her disdain for me all those years.
You're right, I admitted. A part of me still does. I was weak.
I loved her with all my heart, but she hurt me deeply long ago. I had to protect myself from her destructiveness. About 2 months after we started to reconnect, our lawyer surprised us during dinner. He brought up Wendy's ashes, which had been sitting on a shelf in his office for what felt like an eternity. The question of what to do with them hung heavily in the air, creating an awkward silence that was finally broken by my granddaughter's heartfelt plea.
I want a grandmother, Vivian declared, her voice filled with innocence and longing.
Amy and I exchanged looks, both of us understanding the gravity of the moment.
Dad, Amy began tentatively, when Mom passed away, I was in prison. I never got the chance to say goodbye. But now, after meeting you and hearing your side of the story, there are things I need to say to her, even if they're difficult. Can we retrieve her ashes?
All right, I replied, my mind racing with unspoken words. There are things I need to say, too. But deep down, I knew I would never apologize for what I did after enduring years of pain at her hands. Wendy had gotten what she deserved.
I'm not saying you were wrong, Amy reassured me. We all got what we deserved, including me. I've been terrible to you.
It took hitting rock bottom in prison for me to realize the extent of my mistakes and to start changing my life for the better. Frank, Amy's husband, chimed in. I met Amy while she was working as a counselor at a halfway house. I was there for rehab due to my drinking problem. She was on her way out when I fell for her. She helped me overcome my addiction, and I supported her through her struggles. We've been inseparable ever since. Eventually, we agreed that Vivian should have a connection to her grandmother, even if it was just a visit to her grave. It would give Amy and me a place to channel our anger towards Wendy. Later that day, we retrieved the urn from my lawyer's office, placing it in the trunk of the car. I recalled how Wendy had always hated sitting in the back seat due to car sickness, and I couldn't help but think that stowing the urn in the trunk felt fitting. Clearly, I still harbored some unresolved feelings towards my late wife. We relocated to Virginia, where I purchased a small farm on the outskirts of the city. My son-in-law and I decided to raise a handful of horses and operate a modest stable, catering to urban dwellers who wanted to escape to the countryside. In time, we found a final resting place for Wendy's ashes, a quaint family burial plot on our property, which had once belonged to a family from the mid-1800s. We tidied up the plot and surrounded it with a small picket fence, leaving space for additional graves. I arranged for a headstone to be crafted for Wendy, inscribed with the words, Wendy Adams, 1956 to 1995, victim of cancer. She will be deeply missed by all who loved her. It felt like a strange kind of closure. As the years passed, I noticed that my granddaughter often spent time in that little graveyard, absorbed in her books. One day, I asked her why she was drawn to it. Grandma communicates with me and helps me with my reading, she said casually, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Grandpa, she's expressing her regret for hurting you. She promises to make it up to you someday. She also mentioned that she now recognizes your goodness and hopes for your forgiveness. She's wondering if she can wait here in the cold dark until it's your time so she can accompany you into the light and be with you forever. A small voice in my head piped up, By the way, William, nice attempt, but I don't get car sick anymore. I fell to my knees, overwhelmed with emotion, and embraced Vivian tightly. Grandpa, why are you crying? She asked, her innocent eyes wide with concern. In that moment, I realized that perhaps there was a way to find peace, not just for Wendy, but for myself and my family as well.